The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Theodore Sterling's penthouse as Camila Santos stood frozen in the living room, her hands trembling around the small white stick that had changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since their last night together, 3 weeks since he had looked at her with such tenderness and whispered promises that felt eternal. Now, standing in his marble-floored sanctuary high above the city, she wondered if those moments had been real at all. Theodore emerged from his home office, his tailored charcoal suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. His steel-gray eyes, which had once looked at her with warmth, now carried only confusion as he noticed her pale face. He had invited her over to discuss their future, or so he had said over the phone, but Camila knew this conversation would shatter whatever fragile hope she had carried in her heart. She had rehearsed the words 100 times, simple, direct, honest, yet when she opened her mouth, nothing came out the way she had planned. Theodore crossed the room, his expression shifting from concern to something unreadable. Camila took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The baby is yours." The silence that followed was suffocating. Theodore's face transformed from shock to something darker, something that made Camila's stomach twist with dread. He stepped back as if she had struck him, his jaw clenching so tightly she could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. "That's impossible," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Completely impossible." Camila felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. "Theodore, I know this is unexpected, but I'm telling you the truth. I haven't been with anyone else. There is no one else." He laughed then, a bitter sound that echoed through the vast space. "Do you think I'm a fool, Camila? Do you really expect me to believe this ridiculous story?" "It's not a story," she said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "It's the truth. I took 3 tests. I went to a doctor yesterday. I'm 6 weeks along." Theodore turned away from her, his hands curling into fists at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with venom. "I've been told by multiple doctors that I'm infertile. The diagnosis came when I was 28 after a severe case of mumps that caused complications. 7 years, Camila. 7 years of knowing I could never father a child. So you standing here telling me this child is mine is either the cruelest joke or the most obvious con I ever encountered." The words hit Camila like physical blows. She stumbled backward, reaching for the arm of the sofa to steady herself. "You're infertile? You never told me that." "Why would I?" he shot back, spinning to face her. "We were having fun. It was casual, or at least I thought it was, until you showed up with this elaborate scheme." "Scheme?" The word felt like poison on her tongue. "You think I planned this? That I somehow got pregnant to trap you?" Theodore's eyes were hard as diamonds, reflecting none of the man she thought she had come to know over the past 4 months. "What else am I supposed to think? You're an event coordinator making a modest salary. I'm worth $300 million. The math is pretty simple from where I'm standing." Camila felt something inside her chest crack and splinter. She had known Theodore could be cold in business, had heard stories of his ruthless negotiations and ice-water composure, but she had also seen another side of him, the man who laughed at her terrible jokes, who held her close during thunderstorms because she had mentioned once that they frightened her, who looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. That man seemed to have vanished entirely. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I came here because I thought you deserved to know, because despite everything, I believed you were a good man who would want to be part of his child's life." "His child?" Theodore's laugh was harsh. "You mean your child, the child you conceived with whoever you were actually sleeping with while you were with me." The accusation was too much. Camila felt the tears she had been holding back spill down her cheeks. "I was never with anyone else. How can you think that? How can you believe I would do something like that?" "Because the alternative is impossible," Theodore said flatly. "Medical science doesn't lie, Camila, but apparently you do." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unforgivable. Camila looked at the man she had started to fall in love with and saw only a stranger, someone so consumed by his own certainty that he couldn't see past his fear to the truth standing right in front of him. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, drawing myself up with what little dignity I had left. I came here because I respected you enough to tell you face to face. I thought you deserved honesty, but I see now that you've already made up your mind about who I am and what this is. Camila, he started, but she held up her hand. No, you've said enough. You think I'm a liar and a gold digger. You think I orchestrated this whole thing to get access to your bank account. Fine, believe what you want. But know this, Theodore Sterling, I will have this baby. I will love this child with everything I have. And when your son or daughter asks me about their father, I will tell them the truth, that I told you and you turned your back on us both. She grabbed her purse from the sofa and walked towards the door, each step feeling like she was wading through concrete. Theodore stood motionless in the center of the room, his expression unreadable, but his silence deafening. As Camila reached for the doorknob, she paused and looked back one last time. The sad thing is, I really believed you were different. I thought beneath all that money and power was someone capable of trust, of love. I guess I was wrong about more than just you. The elevator doors closed on Theodore's frozen form, and only then did Camila allow herself to fully break down. By the time she reached the lobby, her tears had soaked through the collar of her dress, and her heart felt like it had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, while Camila stood on the sidewalk, one hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach, wondering how she would ever find the strength to move forward alone.
The morning sickness hit Camila hardest in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was still dark and her small apartment felt impossibly empty. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating night in Theodore's penthouse. 3 weeks of silence that spoke louder than any words could. She had blocked his number, deleted every photo, tried to erase him from her life the way he had erased her from his. But the baby growing inside her was a constant reminder that some things could not be undone. Nina arrived at 7 in the morning with ginger tea and crackers, the same routine they had established since Camila confided everything to her best friend. Nina's warm brown eyes were filled with concern as she watched Camila struggle to keep down even the smallest sips of liquid. They sat together on the worn couch, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains of the modest apartment that suddenly felt worlds away from Theodore's gleaming tower. "You need to eat something more substantial," Nina said gently, brushing a strand of dark hair from Camila's pale face. "The baby needs nutrients, and so do you." Camila nodded weakly, though the thought of food made her stomach turn. "I know, I'm trying. It's just hard when everything makes me feel sick, especially the thought of him." Nina's expression hardened. "He doesn't deserve your tears, Camila. Any man who would call you a liar without even considering the possibility that his doctors might have been wrong is not worth your heartbreak." "But what if he was right to doubt me?" Camila whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her sleepless nights. "What if there was some medical mix-up at the clinic? What if somehow this isn't his baby?" "Stop that right now," Nina said firmly. "You know the truth. You haven't been with anyone in over 2 years before Theodore. You told me yourself that he was the first person you trusted enough to let in after everything you went through with your ex. This is his child, and his refusal to believe you says everything about his character and nothing about yours." Camila wanted to believe her friend, but doubt had planted itself deep in her heart. She had replayed that night in her mind countless times, searching for some explanation that would make Theodore's reaction make sense. A man did not react with such absolute certainty unless he had reason to. The medical diagnosis he mentioned, the years of believing he could never father a child, it explained his shock, but it did not excuse his cruelty. Meanwhile, across the city in his executive office, Theodore sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at a private investigator's report on Camila Santos. He had hired the man the morning after their confrontation, driven by anger and suspicion, and something deeper he refused to name. The file had arrived yesterday, and Theodore had read it 3 times, each reading leaving him more unsettled than the last. There were no secrets, no hidden agenda, no mysterious benefactors or suspicious bank transfers. Camila Santos was exactly who she appeared to be. Daughter of immigrants, raised in a working-class neighborhood, put herself through college while working 2 jobs. Her mother had passed away from cancer when Camila was 23, leaving her with medical debts she was still paying off. She volunteered at a community center on weekends, teaching English to recent immigrants. Her ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago had cheated on her repeatedly before she finally left him. She had no criminal record, no history of deception, no pattern of targeting wealthy men. Theodore pushed the file away, rubbing his temples where a headache had been building for days. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who was hardworking, honest, and kind, everything his accusations had denied. Yet the medical facts remained unchanged. 3 different doctors over the years had confirmed his infertility. The damage from the mumps infection had been severe and permanent, or so they had assured him. His assistant knocked softly before entering. "Mr. Sterling, you have the Riverside Properties meeting in 10 minutes. Theodore nodded absently, but as his assistant turned to leave, he found himself asking, "Have you ever known something to be absolutely true, only to find out you were completely wrong?" The young man paused, surprised by the personal question. "I suppose that's how growth happens, sir. We think we know everything, and then life shows us we don't." After the assistant left, Theodore sat in silence, those words echoing in his mind. He thought about Camila's face when he had called her a liar, the devastation in her eyes, the way her voice had broken when she defended herself. He had been so certain, so absolutely convinced of his position. But what if he was wrong? The thought terrified him more than any business deal ever had. That evening, Theodore found himself driving to Mercy General Hospital, where the annual charity gala was being held. He had committed to attending months ago, though now the thought of making small talk with donors and board members felt exhausting. He moved through the crowd mechanically, shaking hands and making appropriate comments, while his mind remained elsewhere. It was pure chance that led him down the wrong corridor while searching for the restroom. Through an open door, he glimpsed a familiar figure in the pediatric.
The autumn rain had given way to early winter cold, and Camila stood in the small clinic waiting room with Nina by her side, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 4 months had passed since that terrible night, and her body had changed in ways that made the pregnancy undeniably real. The slight curve of her belly was visible now beneath her loose sweater, a constant reminder of the life growing inside her and the man who had rejected them both. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by courier to her apartment. Theodore Sterling's attorney had written in formal, impersonal language, requesting that Camila submit to a paternity test. The letter emphasized that Mr. Sterling was prepared to fulfill any legal obligations should the test prove positive, but that he required scientific confirmation before proceeding. There had been no personal note, no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain his accusations had caused, just legal jargon and procedural requirements. Nina had urged her to refuse, to let Theodore live with his doubts and his mistakes, but Camila had surprised herself with her own response. She wanted the test, not for Theodore, but for herself and for the child she carried. She wanted the scientific proof that would silence every whisper of doubt, every moment of fear that maybe, somehow, she had been wrong. She wanted the truth to be undeniable. The nurse called her name, and Camila followed her into a small examination room, where a technician explained the simple cheek swab procedure. It took less than 5 minutes, painless and clinical,
Yet those 5 minutes felt like they carried the weight of her entire future. The results would take 10 days, the technician explained. 10 more days of waiting, of wondering, of trying to prepare herself for whatever came next. Theodore received the same explanation in a different clinic across town, where he submitted his own DNA sample under the watchful eye of his attorney. James Crawford was a shark of a lawyer, paid handsomely to protect Theodore's interests, but even he had seemed uncomfortable with the coldness of the process. As they left the clinic, James had spoken carefully. "Theodore, I have to ask, what happens if the test comes back positive? Have you considered what that means, not just legally, but personally?" Theodore stared out the car window at the gray afternoon, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "I've considered nothing else for weeks." The truth was that Theodore had barely slept since the night he saw Camila at the hospital. He had driven past her apartment building twice, sitting in his car like some pathetic stalker, trying to work up the courage to knock on her door. But what would he say? That he had been investigating her like a criminal? That he had been watching her volunteer with sick children? That he had finally bothered to ask his doctor the right questions and discovered his certainty had been built on a misunderstanding? He had hurt her in ways that could not be easily forgiven. The memory of her tears, of the dignity with which she had walked away from him, haunted his dreams. She had been alone for months now, carrying their child without support or comfort, all because he had been too afraid to believe in the impossible. The 10 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Camila threw herself into work, coordinating a major corporate event that kept her busy 14 hours a day. Nina watched her with worried eyes, knowing that Camila was running from her own thoughts, from the fear of what the results might reveal and what they might change. At night, alone in her apartment, Camila would rest her hand on her growing belly and whisper to the baby she already loved with fierce intensity. "Whatever happens, little one, you are wanted, you are loved, you are mine, and I will never let anyone make you feel like you're a mistake." Theodore spent those same 10 days in a different kind of turmoil. He met with Dr. Morrison twice more, asking questions he should have asked years ago. She explained in detail how fertility could fluctuate, how bodies could heal in unexpected ways, how his specific condition had always left a small window of possibility open. She also gently suggested that his absolute certainty in his infertility might have been less about medicine and more about emotional protection. "You were engaged when you received the diagnosis," Dr. Morrison reminded him. "Your fiancée left you shortly after, saying she wanted children and couldn't wait for uncertain fertility treatments. That kind of rejection leaves scars, Theodore. Sometimes we hold on to diagnoses because they protect us from hoping for things that might hurt us again." Her words cut deeper than any scalpel could. Theodore realized that he had used his infertility as a shield, a reason to keep people at a safe distance, to never fully commit or trust. And when Camila had appeared, kind and genuine and threatening to break through all his carefully constructed walls, he had wielded that diagnosis like a weapon to push her away before she could hurt him first. On the 10th day, both Theodore and Camila received phone calls instructing them to come to the clinic for their results. Theodore's attorney had arranged for them to receive the information separately to avoid any uncomfortable confrontation. But as Theodore sat in his car outside the clinic, watching Camila arrive with Nina, something inside him rebelled against the careful legal distance James had orchestrated. He got out of the car and walked towards them. Camila saw